show. Ladies and gentlemen, we kindly ask that you take your seats as we prepare to begin the show. Kindly take your seats.
I'll tell you a story of a row in the town. When the green flag went up and the crown rag came down, was the neatest and sweetest thing ever you saw. And they played the best games played in Ireland. One of our comrades was down at an exam for the honor of Ireland to hold and defend. And no veteran soldiers but volunteers raw, playing sweet miles of music for Eric O'Braw. Now here's the Pat Pearson, our comrade who died, Tom Clark, McDonough, McDermott, McBride, and here's the James Connolly who gave one hurrah and played the machine gun for Eric O'Braw.
Fenians, Jeremiah O'Donovan Russell, died in New York and was brought back to Ireland for burial. The Irish Republican Brotherhood, the official name of the Fenians, organised the funeral procession through Dublin.
The funeral of O'Donovan Russell on the 1st of August 1915 was, to my mind, the date that publicly revealed that a new political era had begun. It was the prelude to the 1916 Rising. The funeral was most impressive, skillfully organised and carried out. It was a challenge to Dublin Castle and a deeply significant lesson to the Irish people. The Irish Volunteers and a detachment of the Citizen Army marched in uniform, some with arms. Besides the various organisations allied to Sinn Féin, many municipal and local government bodies took part. So too did the Gaelic Athletic Association in large numbers, and the National Volunteers. Pearce's graveside oration was most impressive, but the classical moment for me was the triple volley fired by the Volunteers. It was more than a farewell to an old Fenian. It was a defiance to England by a new generation in Ireland.
My first conscious reaction to all this occurred the day of the funeral of O'Donovan Russell. When the Art Volunteers passed, I suddenly realized that the men I had seen, Tom Clark, the O'Rahilly, Sean McGarry, looked as if they meant serious business. This aspect of the funeral and the reading of Pearce's oration the following day made such a deep impression on my mind that on the following Thursday night, I joined Accompaniment.
I have a conviction deep inside me that we are going to have one more heart-searching trial. The dragons of the past have not died. They were only sleeping. Recent events have stirred them.
Pearce's oration ended with these famous words.
Life springs from death, and from the graves of patriot men and women spring living nations. The defenders of this realm have worked well in secret and in the open. They think that they have pacified Ireland. They think that they have, they think that they have purchased half of us and intimidated the other half. They think that they have foreseen everything. Think that they have provided against everything. But the fools, the fools, the fools. They have left us our Fenian dead, and while Ireland holds these graves, Ireland, unfree, shall never be at peace.
The English finally enacted Home Rule and then suspended its implementation. And the Irish parliamentary politicians accepted that. But the militant activists didn't. Whatever they called themselves, Gaelic Leaguers, Fenians, Volunteers, Sinn Féin, Citizen Army, accompaniment, Separatists, Irish Republican Brotherhood, they all agreed. Home Rule was no longer enough. They wanted what had been stolen from Ireland, her freedom.
First thing that made me interested in national politics was a visit I paid about 1911 or 1912 as a trained nurse to the typhus hospital in Belmullet, where my sister was nursing the patients. There was an epidemic of that disease in Mayo. I was horrified at the conditions prevailing in the hospital. It wasn't a hospital at all. It was only an old barn converted to that purpose. You could see the sky through the ceiling and the walls, and the patients were lying in filth on the floor. It occurred to me that it was time that the government that was responsible for that state of affairs should have been expelled from the country.
Sinn Féin was a new movement with very little following. The bulk of the people were satisfied with the Irish Parliamentary Party and their efforts to get home rule. If you talked about Sinn Féin, you tried to bring up a new idea, people looked on you as being a bit queer with notions.
The outbreak of the European War in 1914 made many changes. I would say from the outbreak of war to the rising of 1916, the national spirit had fallen very low. All Irish members of British Parliament had become recruiting officers for the British Army.
In the Irish Ireland movement, there was a sort of honour among the fellows. We advocated general good conduct, respect for women, etc. I never saw the sign of drink on anyone at any of our occasions. There is no question that the Gaelic League sowed the seeds of the Republican struggles that led to the Rising and the subsequent struggle for independence, though most of us did not know the fight was so near.
Long before the men got around to organising, Irish women had already taken the first steps to independence.
Maud Gonne founded the Inganee na HÉireann because the IRB or other nationalist societies would not permit women. She felt no resentment. It was a lucky thing that we had our own organisation because we were independent and not a branch of anything. We were able to do what we liked. With the result, we did things in advance of other movements.
I resigned from the IRB, to which I believe I was the only woman ever admitted. We had lost faith in a secret society for freeing Ireland, but we felt an open revolutionary movement could create an atmosphere out of which armed revolution could develop.
It's a curious thing that men seem to be unable to believe that any woman can embrace an ideal, accept it intellectually, feel it as a profound emotion, and then calmly decide to make a vocation for its realization. They give themselves endless pains to prove that every serious thing a woman does, outside nursing babies or washing pots, is the result of being in love with some man, or looking for excitement or limelight, or indulging their vanity.
Inganee was well represented in Easter week 1916. Elizabeth O'Farrell, the GPO, carrying the white flag to the British. Prissy Doyle, a pale middle-aged woman in Stephen's Green. Mary Proles, always ready to dare. Helena Maloney, a British officer, called her the walking arsenal. Going to fight with Sean Connolly, only to find herself instead nursing him and hearing his last words, "Go on, we are winning."
I was present at the foundation meeting of Accompaniment in the early part of 1914. There were not more than a dozen women present, but they represented all shades of nationalist opinion. At this time, the objects of the organization were to advance the cause of Irish liberty, to organize Irish women in the furtherance of this object, to assist in the arming and equipping of a body of Irishmen for the defense of Ireland, and to form a fund for these purposes, to be called a Defence of Ireland Fund.
In the year 1911, 1907, we decided to start a women's journal. I think that we, Irish women, in common with the women of the rest of the civilised world, felt that the time had come when the point of view of women of many aspects of social and national life had to be expressed definitely. The national position and international politics was front-page news. But we also had fashion notes, gardening notes, anti-recruiting notes, a children's corner with a serial fairy story, and good original poems. It was a funny hodgepodge of blood and thunder, high thinking and homemade bread. It was an odd kind of woman's paper, a mixture of guns and chiffon.
I was in Cumanamon, being secretary for a time. I got tired of that, as we were only collecting money and such like activities. I went to Liberty Hall for good, and I took part in all the activities in the Citizen Army.
It seemed the right thing to Countess Markovich's direct mind to begin founding an army of boys, Nafina Aaron, who would grow up to know exactly what they were fighting for.
Small boys are natural radicals, and the boys given a uniform and some semblance of a military organization needed no encouragement to declare themselves openly as revolutionaries who look forward to the day when they might strike a blow in another fight for freedom. Of course, adults smile tolerantly at this, not realizing that the boy will soon be a man, and that the sentiments imbibed in his formative years are likely to remain with him later in life and to turn into deeds when the opportunity offers.
On one occasion, at Ballin College, the senior boys were preparing a meal after field exercise. Suddenly, out from some trees that screened the place, came a man on horseback with a hunting crop and riding boots. He was typical of a tyrant from the land war days. "Who gave you permission to camp here?" he said in a stern voice. Tomas McCurtain, Bob Langford and Donald O'Callaghan, who were present, answered in native tongue. It could easily be seen he was hostile to everything Irish. He threatened to call the police, which only grew more retorts than others, to our great delight. He was one of those who expected people to bow before him. He couldn't understand his orders being disobeyed, and him, a justice of the peace. He did not know that a new spirit had been born, and the Irish nation had awakened from its slumber.
The Citizen Army.
One thing that helped along the right lines was the fight put up by the Dublin workers in 1913. It was the first time I commenced thinking along physical force lines.
The Irish Citizen Army was formed in 1913, primarily to protect the... But no doubt, Connolly had revolution in his mind all the time.
Jim Larkin went away to America and Jim Connolly took over. It was soon apparent to us that Jim Connolly meant business, that he was not going to play soldiers, and the going would be very rough for some people. We were having a great time after Connolly and Mallon took over the army. It was drill, most of the time, and we were becoming experts with rifles. We had something that was worth more than anything else, a peculiar comradeship that had no limits. It meant that you stood by your mates against old-comers, friend or foe. It made for a carelessness in danger and a happy-go-lucky, devil-may-care comradeship that I had never experienced before.
I joined the Citizen Army at its inception. I loved Connolly, Mallon, and Madam Markovich. I took part in providing arms for them. I met a soldier from the Castle Gregory in public houses. I got pieces of machine guns, and I paid for them.
About this time there was a strike at North Wall, and the men were picketing for a couple of days and were getting the worst of it, as the police had not lost any of their aggressiveness. After 3 days, Jim Connolly ordered a squad of men fully equipped to go down and see would the police stop them. The police had the place to themselves, but when the squad marched down and fixed bayonets, all their happy smiles faded. They knew it was bayonet against baton, and they could not stomach steel. The strike was settled the next morning. This was the first time ever in a trade union dispute that armed workers had done picket duty.
Behind the scenes, the Irish Republican Brotherhood was the mainspring of all the nationalist activity. An oath-bound secret society founded in 1858. They were popularly known as the Fiends.
The glad side, I'm with no woman, rocking down the road. She hears soft trouble. I was too wild. The song she was on. Gloria, Gloria, to the gold feet. It's 50 long years since I saw little people on strong and reformed, and her eyes with a gleaming, I see her again. She threw all my sweet Gloria, Gloria, to the both feet. I passed on my way. God be praised that I met her, feel life on her shoulder. I will never forget her. We may have returned, but we'll never forget her. Gloria, Gloria, to the both feet. Gloria.
Began in August 1914, the Irish Republican Brotherhood decided to launch an insurrection at the first opportune moment. They created a military council to plan the rising. 7 men formed the council: Tom Clark, Padraig Pearse, Joseph Plunkett, Eamon Kent, Sean McDermott, James Connolly, and Moss MacDonagh. On Easter Sunday, these 7 men became the provisional government of the Irish Republic and signed the proclamation of the Irish Republic.
I had thought of Tom Clark as an old man who was in jail for Ireland before I was even born. And so I'm surprised, very, very surprised, by his youthful demeanour and enthusiasm. He spoke of fighting for Ireland as casually as he did about any item of the day's news. To him, to fight England was to him the most natural thing in the world for an Irishman. He had wonderful energy, a great power of concentration and capacity for mastering details, and a quick judgment. His years of solitary confinement in prison made him a man of few words, which made people think of him as abrupt.
My first connection with the national movement was through the Gaelic Athletic Association and the Gaelic League. About 1909, at a hurling match, I met a senior GAA official who was an organiser with the IRB. I agreed to join, so he swore me in there and then, and told me to start enrolling new members in Waterford.
A general meeting of the IRB was held in December 1913 to emphasise the duty of IRB men to cooperate to the fullest extent in the formation of Irish volunteer companies, and of choosing IRB men as officers where possible.
I joined the IRB in 1914. The main aim was recruiting new members, and the policy was peaceful penetration to achieve the widest possible influence in all groups, concentrating on trade unions, sports organisations, and the Gaelic League.
A feeling of comradeship which never previously existed sprung up. Men who had only a nodding acquaintance shook hands when they met in the street. We were no longer a mob. We were volunteers. We looked forward to long lines of well-trained armed marching men. We would pay for our own arms when we could get them, and we would fight for the freedom of Ireland when the opportunity arose. We were taught what discipline meant, and we knew how to obey orders. And from start to finish of the volunteers, discipline became a matter of honour with every man.
I heard the company behind mine singing a very fine marching song. That was the first time the soldier's song was sung in public. It caught on, and in a few days' time, every volunteer in Dublin was whistling or singing it.
We will sing a song, a soldier's song, a cheering, rousing chorus. As round our waiting fires we drum the starry heaven home, impatient and coming fight. And as we await the morning light, hearing the silence of the night, we chant a soldier's song. Soldiers are we, whose lives are pledged to Ireland. Some have come from a land beyond the waves, sworn to be free. No more our ancient Ireland shall shelter the despot or the slave. Tonight we turn again in Erin's cause come forward, with hands roar and rifles peal. We'll chant a soldier's song.
The first order of business for the volunteers was to acquire arms. With funds donated by well-to-do sympathisers, a large shipment of Mauser rifles was purchased in Hamburg and brought by yacht to Ireland.
The gun running at Howth was rather cleverly done by the people responsible for it, because there had been a march out to Baldoyle a week before the Howth gun running took place, and the rumour was spread that we were going out to get arms, with the result that all the police were after us. The police saw that when we got to Baldoyle, we sat down, ate our lunch, did a bit of drilling, and then came home again. So when the actual day came at Howth, they paid us very little attention.
The Howth gun running was followed by a second shipment of arms, which were landed at Kilcoon, County Wicklow, about a week later. And the appearance of rifles on volunteer parades gave a decided fillip to morale. A month later, August 1914, the declaration of war between Britain and Germany caused a flutter of tense excitement in volunteer circles. Now, we thought, our chance had come. A war in Europe would so distract the forces of the enemy that surely This was a providential opportunity to strike for freedom.
Nothing very important happened before the rising except that the IRB supplied us with rifles and ammunition. There was a rifles fund in the IRB and we paid £1 per month for rifles and ammunition.
We were beginning to get arms then from British soldiers. A lot of these men would sell their rifles for a drink. And some of them would just hand over their rifles to the volunteers because they knew they were the volunteers.
A few weeks before the rising, sometime in March, I was coming from a meeting with accompaniment with Sean McDermott. We went into J.J. Walsh's shop in Blessington Street, where Sean wants to leave some dispatches. After a lot of talk, during which J.J. said it would be quite easy to land arms at ports along the coast, Sean and I came out. He said people like J.J. Walsh could ruin us to talk like that. He wished they would just keep their mouths shut.
About this time, a national collection for the Defence of Ireland fund was held. For this collection, I was ordered to see the local parish priest to obtain permission to collect at the church gates. On my way to his house, I met him on the road and told him of the collection. "What is the object of the volunteers?" he asked. "Well, Canon," I replied, "it's to drive the British out of Ireland." "Wouldn't it be great if we could do it?" said he. "By all means, hold the collection." The collection was carried out and realised a good sum.
James Connolly warned the citizen army of the dangers ahead.
You are going into a fight with everything against you. The odds are 1,000 to 1. If you lose, you will be the worst characters that ever a country gave birth to. If you win, you will be the greatest that the country ever produced.
During our labours in Liberty Hall, we had visits from Connolly, Mallon and Madame Markovich. It was quite usual for Madame to drop in during the afternoons and present us with a bag of cakes for our tea. I recall her saying during one of her afternoon visits, "I have already overdrawn my bank account for my next quarter's allowance to the extent of £45. And if this bally revolution doesn't take place soon, I don't know how I'm going to live."
In the press room, papers were printed and sold like hotcakes. I'm sure the people in the castle were having very sleepless nights. With all their power of police and soldiers, tanks and guns, they could not stop the flow of rebel propaganda from Liberty Hall.
On Friday night, Mallon came to me from a meeting in Liberty Hall and told me what my position was to be in the citizen army. Said Mallon, with his heavenly smile, "Is it dangerous enough for you?" I felt very proud. But afterwards, I had a very bitter feeling of frustration as I did not take part in the fighting.
On Holy Saturday, I met De Valera in Camden Row. He had left the drill ground and I was just approaching it. We stopped to talk. And he said a remarkable thing. "We'll be all right. It's the women who will suffer. The worst they can do to us is to kill us. But the women will have to remain behind to rear the children."
Saturday, April 22nd. News of the capture of Roger Casement and the sinking of the German arms shipment reached Dublin. The Irish Republican Brotherhood's military council had kept the plans for the rising a closely guarded secret. Volunteer leaders who had been kept in the dark, Owen MacNeill, Bulmer Hobson and the O'Reilly, learned the truth on Thursday. After 2 days of strained and bitter argument with Pearse, McDonough and Kent, MacNeill ordered Sunday's mobilisation cancelled and placed a notice to that effect in the Sunday Independent newspaper. But despite the secrecy, IRB men and many volunteers and citizen army men and women knew that something serious was in the air.
It was a great shock to read MacNeill's order. Although I knew MacNeill very well, I felt that it would be very wrong to obey this order to demobilise.
Michael Mallon told me that MacNeill had done the worst day's work that had ever been done in the history of this unfortunate country.
Easter Sunday, April 23rd. The Irish Republican Brotherhood Military Council, now acting as the provisional government of the Irish Republic, met all day at Liberty Hall and decided on Connolly's motion to postpone action for 24 hours in order to allow new mobilisation orders to be issued.
The girls took part in night route marches with the men of the Citizen Army. We would be mobilised at midnight. I took part in the one to Dublin Castle. On Easter Sunday, we went for a route march, and I know that was the day the bugler sounded his bugle at each of the places that were taken in the Rising. James Connolly was on that route march.
Sometime about midnight on Sunday, Connolly came to me as I was on my way home. I asked him, what time will I come down in the morning? Come down at 8 o'clock, he said. As early as that? He turned and looked at me and said, do you think that's too early for a revolution?
Easter Monday, April 24th, a bank holiday. A fine spring day to go to the seaside or to the races at Fairyhouse. MacNeill's cancellation orders had caused confusion and demoralisation. Outside Dublin, very few volunteers mobilised. In Dublin itself, mobilisation was partial at best. The original plan drawn up by Plunkett and Connolly assumed a full roster of 2,000 fighters, but now fewer than 800 men and women assembled that day. Another 700 joined once the fighting had begun. Reviewing the rebel troops from the steps of Liberty Hall, Connolly declared,
from the moment the first shot is fired, there will no longer be volunteers or citizen army, but only fighters of the Army of the Irish Republic.
Easter Sunday dawned. We expected to go into action, but there were no orders. By Monday morning, the garrison was in a state bordering on mutiny. Some spoke of going to join James Connolly at Liberty Hall. We were unwashed and angry, and took little notice of poor George Plunkett, until he started reading a dispatch. D Company, Headquarters Battalion will assemble at Liberty Hall. We marched to the tram line and boarded a tram. Honest George, we marched to the tram line and boarded a tram. Honest George paid our fares. 59 two-penny fares, please, and don't stop until you reach O'Connell Bridge.
On Easter Sunday, the Hibernian Rifles paraded as usual. I had the feeling that there was something serious afoot, and I ordered our units to again parade on Easter Monday. When the information came that the volunteers had seized the GPO, I told the men that as far as I knew, this fight was unofficial. But as it had started, we should join in and take our place in it. At the same time, that if any man did not want to volunteer for the fight, he was at liberty to go home. About 30 men elected to join in the fight.
On Easter Monday morning, about 10 o'clock, the commandant sent me an order to mobilise my company. When I saw the commandant, he told me we were going into action at 12 o'clock. I asked him, were they mad? His reply was, I am a soldier, and I know you are a soldier also. I saluted and retired.
Beresford Place was full of citizen army men and women. Everything was bustle and excitement. We formed up in front of Liberty Hall, and Margaret Skinner rushed over and said to me, it's on. I asked, what's on? She said, the rebellion, of course.
I remember especially seeing Joe Plunkett, beautifully dressed with riding boots and spurs, tall, aristocratic, with his pince-nez glasses and clever-looking face. He was the picture of the traditional staff officer. James Connolly, I figured. He looked very drab beside Joe Plunkett in his ill-fitting, bottle green, thin serge uniform. The form of dress impressed me as representing two different ideas of freedom. James Connolly was a naked fact.
About 20 minutes after our arrival there, we formed up in a procession and moved along the quays. Para Bracken showed me an order by James Connolly saying, we are to take over the 2 number of men. I rushed over towards Hopkins Corner. The main body proceeded around the corner into O'Connell Street.
Inside the GPO, there was a feverish activity fortifying it and getting into stores, as well as establishing communications and the other garrisons in the city. Headquarters staff was established in the City Hall, Centre Hall, and the sorting room was made into a hospital.
A message had come from Ned Daly to say that we were to disband, go home, and await further instructions. Breege Dixon and I decided that we were not going home. Here was something that would never happen in our lives again. We decided to go down to the center of the city and see what was going on. We walked down to O'Connell Street and went into the post office.
Shortly after our arrival, the tricolour was hoisted on the flagstaff at the left-hand corner facing Princeton Street. Copies of the proclamation were posted on the walls and pillars of the building, and Commandant Pearce read aloud the proclamation of the Irish Republic.
Public Nahairn, the Provisional Government of the Irish Republic, the people of Ireland. Irish men and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generations from which she receives her old tradition of nationhood, Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. Having organised and trained her manhood through her secret revolutionary organisation, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and through her open military organisations, the Irish Volunteers and the Irish Citizen Army. Having patiently perfected her discipline, having resolutely waited for the right moment to reveal itself, she now seizes that moment, and supported by her exiled children in America and by gallant allies in Europe, but relying in the first on her own strength, she strikes in full confidence of victory. We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies to be sovereign and indefeasible. The long usurpation of that right by a foreign people and government has not extinguished the right, nor can it ever be extinguished except by the destruction of the Irish people. In every generation, the Irish people have asserted themselves in arms to their right to national freedom and sovereignty. 6 times during the past 300 years, they have asserted it in arms. Standing on that fundamental right, and again asserting it in arms in the face of the world, we hereby proclaim the Irish Republic as a sovereign, independent state. And we pledge our lives and the lives of our comrades in arms to the cause of its freedom, of its welfare, and of its exaltation among the nations. The Irish Republic is entitled to and hereby claims the allegiance of every Irish man and Irish woman. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights and equal opportunities to all its citizens, and declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and of all its parts, cherishing all the children of the nation equally and oblivious of the differences carefully fostered by an alien government which had divided a minority from the majority in the past. Until our arms have brought the opportune moment for the establishment of a permanent national government, representative of the whole people of Ireland, and elected by the suffrages of all her men and women, the provisional government hereby constituted will administer the civil and military affairs of the Republic in trust for the people. We place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, whose blessing we invoke upon our arms, and we pray that no one who serves that cause will dishonor it by cowardice, inhumanity, or rapine. In this supreme hour, the Irish nation must, by its valor and discipline, and by the readiness of its children to sacrifice themselves for the common good, prove itself worthy of the august destiny to which it is called. Signed on behalf of the Provisional Government, Thomas J. Clark, Sean McDermott, Thomas McDonough, P. H. Pearce, Eamon Kant, James Connolly, Joseph Plunkett.
Every whispered goodbye, love, old Ireland is calling. High over Dublin, a tricolour flies. In the streets of the city, the phone man is calling, and neighbours are whistling, old Ireland will rise. So all around my hat, I wear a tricolour ribbon. All around my hat, unto death comes to me. If anyone should ask me why I am wearing it, it's all for my own true love I never more will see.
The British had been taken unawares. It was a bank holiday, and many military officers had gone to the races or were away on leave. And prominent members of the Irish government had gone to England on the Sunday. On Monday morning, the O'Reilly, who had opposed the rising, came into the General Post Office and announced,
I helped to wind this clock, and I've come to hear it ring. It's madness. It is glorious madness, and I want to be in on it.
I'm sure that eyewitnesses that late afternoon and next day would say that what most impressed them, and impressed them most unfavorably, was the frivolity and recklessness of the crowd, particularly of the women and children.
One of my men on Monday afternoon told me that there were two strange-looking men outside. Judging by their appearance, I took them to be seamen. I asked what they wanted. The smaller of the two said, I am from Sweden, my friend from Finland. We want to fight. We want to come in. So I said, tell me how you want to come in here and fight against England. He said, Finland, a small country. Russia, eat her up. Sweden, another small country. Russia, eat her up too. Russia with the British, therefore we against. I said, can you fight? Do you know how to use a weapon? He said, I can use a rifle. My friend, no. He can use what you shoot fowl with, a shotgun. I decided to admit them. They were there to the end, and they were captured. The Swede, through his consul, got away in no time. The Finn was with us in Clonmel jail for 3 weeks. The Finn was not a Catholic, and he had no English. But before he left, he was saying the rosary in Irish.
Four of my brothers were in the fight, all in different areas. Maddie, the youngest, had gone into the GPO and was in it for a day when Pierce saw him and took his gun. He looked young and was small, and Pierce said there were enough of his family fighting.
Whilst I was talking to Connolly, he was approached by a man who was somewhat under the influence of drink. The man said that he wanted to join the garrison, and Connolly asked him why. Because, the man said, I want to fight for Ireland. Are you sure you want to fight for Ireland? Connolly asked him. I am certain, said the man. Well then, said Connolly, will you go home now? Have a good sleep, and when you are sober, come back and tell me that you still want to fight for Ireland, and I'll give you a rifle.
At 12 exactly, we set out to take up our position in Jacob's biscuit factory. There was some difficulty about the keys which were to admit us to the factory, so a window about 6 feet from the ground had to be broken, through which we climbed in. One volunteer scrambling through the window let off his shotgun and bored a large hole in the ceiling. John McBride picked some of the powder from his moustache and casually warned the rest of the boys to be more careful.
Shortly after 3 o'clock, a military detachment came down along Camden Street. When they arrived at the top of Bishop Street, they were fired on by the volunteers from Jacobs, and they promptly retreated. Nothing else of importance happened on Monday.
I joined the volunteers just 3 weeks before the rising. I was only 15 years old at the time, but I had grown to 6 feet and so I was taken in as a man. When I arrived at Jacobs, the place was surrounded by a howling mob, roaring at the volunteers that were inside. I remember the first blood I ever saw shed. It was a big, very big, tall woman with something very heavy in her hand. And she came across and lifted up her arm to make a bang at me. One of the volunteers upstairs saw this and fired. And I just remember seeing her head and face disappear. She went down like a sack. That was my baptism of fire. And I remember my knees nearly going out from under me. I would have sold my mother and father and the Pope just to get out of that bloody place. But, you know, you recover after a few minutes.
Emmett Katz said there were 2 reasons against taking Guinness's brewery. One was the vastness of the place. It would be nearly impossible to garrison it. And the other reason was that there was no food in it. Hugh Burns said that the group around, "Is the man mad? The most magnificent food in Ireland is Guinness."
Tuesday, April 25th was a sultry day. The skies fat with rain. The rebels dug in, consolidated their positions, erected barricades, and bored through buildings to control whole blocks.
Prior to Easter week, I mentioned to Connolly that as soon as the insurrection started, I thought there would be widespread looting. His reply was merely, that would be one more problem for the British.
The long morning of waiting brought no sign of the British. We were tense with waiting and anxious to get on with it. But there were distractions, like watching the looters. Nothing during those first days of the rising depressed us volunteers more than the sometimes senseless and absurd looting of central Dublin.
During this time, the mobs from the back streets were busy smashing windows in the big shops and looting everything they could get their hands on. The long suffering under the economic conditions and low wages for their labour made them more determined to grab all they could. It was a pity to see them, especially able-bodied men, doing this kind of thing instead of being in the firing line with us.
I motored up to Dublin on the Tuesday with my uncle Frank McGuinness and a man called Tom Bannon to take part in the rising. It was a glorious summer day for our trip. The peace of the country was as remote as possible from the conflict taking place in Dublin. There was no sign of disturbance until we came to the city. We certainly had an argument with the military. I remember my uncle brandishing his warrant as a justice of the peace and saying he'd been summoned by the castle authorities to attend a meeting. Then I remember getting into Father Matthew Hall, which was in darkness. I saw somebody lying on a pillow covered with blood. I hastened onto the forecourts and got in through a hole in the wall.
At 6 a.m. on Tuesday, I received orders from Connolly to take my men onto the roof of the Exchange Hotel. In the afternoon, British units advanced to storm our positions and were met by a fusillade from our shotguns and rifles. They were actually slaughtered by our fire. 23 or 4 of them were killed or seriously wounded. At about 4:30 that evening, we received orders to retire. A remarkable thing about this was the sudden change in the conduct of the people of the locality towards us. On the way from the GPO to the Exchange Hotel, the people were hostile towards us. Now, they were sympathetic and helped us to get back.
Throughout the rising, supplying and feeding the rebels was a constant concern.
On Tuesday evening, a party of us were selected and brought down to St. John's Convent, occupied by the French Sisters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul, and they lived up to their reputation. They supplied us with hot soup all through the week. I have no doubt that this went a long way in sustaining our energy and strength to the end.
A messenger boy from some poultry shop had dropped off 6 chickens, which had meant for the officers' mess in Richmond Barracks. Later we got word that a dairy cart and 4 churns of milk had been commandeered, and that a bread van was also got.
We had plenty of food in the 4 courts. The men used to go out early every morning and bring in bread, meat, and other food for the day. We knew them as Looter Flood.
On Tuesday morning, I made up my mind to go where I guess my brothers were, down in the North King Street area. They were all in very high spirits, laughing and joking, and there didn't seem to be any fighting. I decided to stay there and help the volunteers.
I had a talk with Tom Clark in the kitchen that Tuesday night. He said that people naturally now would be against them for rising and for coming out like this. that one of the reasons for people being against them would be because of the countermandering order. But that in any case, a rebellion is necessary to make Ireland's position felt at the peace conference, so that its relation to the British Empire would strike the world. I asked him, why a republic? He replied, you must have something striking in order to appeal to the imagination of the world.
We marched in from Kildare and got into the post office on Tuesday. We had tea, eggs and cigars. I thought we should have got arrested, but Connolly paraded us and said, it doesn't matter a damn if we're wiped out now, as we have justified ourselves. I thought this a bit rubbish.
I am a merry ploughboy, I plough my fields by day, till the sun taught into my mind that I should run away. For I'm tired of this civilian life since the day that I was born. So I'm off to join the IRA, and I'm off tomorrow morn. And we're off to Dublin in the green, the helmets glistening in the sun, where the bayonets flash and the rifles crash, the rattling of the Thompson gun. I leave aside my pick and spade, I leave aside my plough, and I leave aside my old grey mare, and the more I need them now. I leave aside my Mary, she's the girl I do adore, and I wonder will she think of me when she hears the cannon call. And we're off to Dublin in the green, the helmets glistening in the sun, where the bayonets flash and the rifles crash, the echo of the Thompson gun. And when the war is over, the dear old Ireland's free, I will take her to the church to wed, and a rebel's white jubilee. Some men fight for silver, some men fight for gold, but the IRA you're fighting for the land that the Saxons stole. And we're off to Dublin in the green, the helmets glistening in the sun, where the bayonets flash and the rifles crash, the echo of the Thompson gun.
Wednesday, April 26th was a delightful day with brilliant sunshine. British reinforcements finally started arriving. Several thousand troops landed at Dunleary and marched towards the city centre. During the fiercest battle of the week at the Mount Street Bridge over the Grand Canal, 13 volunteers inflicted over 200 casualties, killed or wounded, on the Sherwood Foresters.
Monday and Tuesday passed with the British searching out our positions and our attacking any opportunity. On Wednesday we got word in the early morning that an enormous forces were arriving at Dunleary.
From our house on Northumberland Road, we saw everything that happened there during the week's fighting. We saw the volunteers fortifying number 25 on Monday. On Wednesday morning, the soldiers came along. It seemed to us in their thousands, and the garrison in 25 Northumberland Road held their fire until they were level with the house. The soldiers were bewildered and began to fire at the house on our side of the road, not knowing where the firing was coming from. The fight continued till about 7 o'clock. The military were unable to make a direct attack on number 25 on account of the way the steps were situated. At last, they made a charge in it, rushed up the steps, but I think by that time there was no one in the house but the dead body of Volunteer Malone.
We took up position on the roof of a shed. The first enemy attack came across Mount Street Bridge at 11:30. They were fired on by the men in Clonwilliam House, and any that survived to cross the bridge, we fired at them. They came in rather in a wild manner and appeared not to know what to do. Another rush across the bridge was repeated later by another group of enemy troops and met with strong fire from Clanwilliam House.
The British made gallant efforts to cross the canal bridge, and they repeatedly formed and reformed in their efforts to do so. This fight was started about midday on Wednesday, and at about 8 o'clock that night, I saw the horrible sight of Clanwilliam House burning, and I knew that the bodies of our comrades were being consumed in the flames. The fire at Clanwilliam House was to us the start of a fearful nightmare of fires and explosions.
The British strategy was to surround the heart of the city with a ring of steel and avoid another costly frontal assault. Within the cordon, while the rebel positions engaged in sniping against British forces, the people's attitude towards the Republicans was changing.
The people in the Church Street area were generally hostile for the first couple of days, but later their attitude changed completely. The distribution of bread to all residents of the area was made daily, and this helped to mellow the attitude of those who were hostile.
Earlier Wednesday morning, we had a big shock. We came very suddenly alert to the crash of shell fire somewhere downriver. The British had brought a gunboat up the Liffey and was shelling Liberty Hall. Only the outer walls remained by the end of the week, and that proud banner of the Citizen Army, "We serve neither King nor Kaiser but Ireland," was still hanging on its facade.
The attitude of the civilians towards us was mixed. Some were very hostile and some were friendly. A milkman brought us milk 2 or 3 times during the day. He came again on Thursday. He volunteered to do this and refused to accept any payment. After about midday on Thursday, we saw him no more. It would not then have been possible for him to get near the place.
Barney Mellows came in and woke us and said that Patrick Clancy had taken over a post and 2 girls were required to go over to him and his men. Somebody said, "Call that fat girl that came up from the country." I resented the slight, but my patriotism asserted itself. It was a hazardous expedition over broken glass and bullets were flying. This was just before daybreak, and we were barely able to make our way in the grey dawn. All this time, this fighting was intensifying. I felt like the enemy was closing in on us.
On Wednesday night, when a young lad called Sammy Riley and myself were on sniper duty, they brought an armoured tank around the corner into O'Connell Street, and it proceeded to clank all down towards us. So I said to O'Reilly, "You take the right aperture and I'll take the left," and we concentrated fire and stopped it. We must have killed the driver or injured somebody, because it stopped right there, and eventually that night, when the lights were out, they came along and pulled it all the way back from where it came from.
A party from Jacobs was detailed to go and get meat and vegetables, which were very easily procured, because the majority of the people in the shops around were only too willing to give them. The people, who had been very hostile at the beginning of the week, had turned completely around and were giving us any information they could get.
For the first few days of the fighting, wounds treated were of a minor nature. But as time went on, the number of more seriously wounded patients increased, and we carried them on stretchers into the hall and dressed their wounds. This work and that of carrying the food to the men at the numerous barricades in Church Street continued up to Friday. As the week came to a close, the fighting became more intensive, and it became very difficult to collect the wounded. Some were carried into our hall by their comrades. Some of the more seriously wounded were carried to the Richmond Hospital close by.
Night was dark and the fight was over. Moon shone down O'Connell Street. I stood alone where brave men have perished. Those men have gone, their gods to least. My only son was shot in Dublin, fighting for his country, boy. He fought for Ireland and Ireland only. On the shamrock, green, white and gold. The last I met was a dying brother. Kneeling o'er, I heard him say, God bless my home in Decorah City. God bless the cause for which I died. My only son was shot in Dublin, fighting for his country home. He fought for Ireland and Ireland only. The heart, the shamrock, green, white and gold.
The British concentrated their fire on the two city centre strongholds, the General Post Office and the Four Courts. From Wednesday morning on, their artillery pounded these positions with explosive and incendiary shells. On the Wednesday night, as fire spread along O'Connell Street, Pearse told his former pupil Desmond Fitzgerald,
When we are all wiped out, people will condemn us and blame us for everything. But in a few years, they will see the meaning of what we tried to do.
On Thursday night, O'Connell Street appeared to be a blazing inferno. The fires were massive. The roaring of the flames, the noise of breaking glass and collapsing walls was terrific. The flames from the Imperial Hotel and Hoyt's Drug and Oil stores were so fierce that they almost touched the wall of the GPO, and we could feel the heat of them.
It was the firing of this barricade that caused the fire which wiped out the east side of O'Connell Street. I saw the barricade being hit, the fire consuming it. Then Hoyt's caught fire. Hoyt's had a lot of turpentine and other inflammable stuff. And I saw the fire spread from there to Cleary's. I had the extraordinary experience of seeing the huge plate glass windows of Cleary's stores run molten into the channel from the terrific heat.
They had a tank inside the castle, a 20-ton tank. I saw the Tommies turning it around one day, and they knocked down a wall which had been there for 100 years. I heard an old Dublin apple seller saying, when she saw it clanking down the street one day, "Begod, what bridge is going for a walk?"
Friday, April 26th, another fine spring day. The British forces had completed their encirclement of the rebel positions.
We were out on
1,500 rebels now faced over 20,000 enemy troops. It became impossible for the leaders in the GPO to maintain contact with all the other positions.
We were out on messages on Wednesday, came in on Thursday morning, and went out again on Thursday about midday. We took 3 copies of the proclamation, which I gave to the wives of the leaders. On Friday, I made an attempt to get back to the GPO. It was very difficult. I went along by the College of Surgeons. It was all pockmarked from a machine gun placed on the Shelburne Hotel. It was in front of the College of Surgeons that I saw the dog being shot. It ran out in front of me, and suddenly it lay on the ground. It could have been myself if I'd walked on another bit. I went home then.
On Friday, the strain was beginning to tell on the small garrison. I urged the officers to relieve the men so they could get some sleep. This had an excellent effect. The food problem was quite another matter. We were very fortunate in having ample supplies of bread. The cooking was comparatively easy, as we had ovens and fuel from the bakery. But the real trouble was getting the food distributed to other posts.
During all those days, the fighting was terrifying, the activities were unceasing, and the British military seemed to have arrived in force and were heavily engaged by the volunteers. There was deafening firing going on from all directions. The sniping was uninterrupted. 2 old men, evidently inhabitants of the street, came in and asked if we'd any food. They and their family had not had food for days. They were very poor people. I gave them ham and bread and butter.
On Thursday, Connolly ordered me to take about 10 men and occupy a house at the corner of Liffey Street. And on Friday, a couple of young men with me, who were deserters from the Dublin Fusiliers, asked me, seeing that the fight was over, would I give them a chance to make their getaway, as it would be very serious for them if they were not fighting with us. I saw the force of their necessity and let them go. That evening I said to the others, it is all over now. There's no use trying to retreat to the post office. Each one of us that can now make his getaway, do so.
Rosary after rosary was recited during the last 24 hours as the British military were closing in on the area. The firing was intense on Saturday. The noise of rifle firing was deafening. Soon, we learned that the military were closing in on the outskirts of the area, and that our dear comrades were vacating their outposts and retreating to their headquarters in the forecourts. The noise was still deafening.
At Easter time, 1916, while flowers bloomed and leaves were green, there dawned a day when freedom's cry called on brave men to fight and die. They were the men with the vision, the men with the cause, the men who defy their oppressors' laws, the men who traded their chains for guns. Born into slavery, they were freedom's sons. In Dublin town, they fought and died. With Pierce McDermott and McBride, ourselves alone, their battle cry, and freedom rang through that Easter sky. They were the men with the vision, the men with the cause, the men who defied their oppressors' laws, the men who traded their chains for guns. Born into slavery, they were freedom's sons, and born into slavery, they were freedom's sons.
Later on Friday, with the General Post Office on fire and the volunteers preparing to evacuate the building, Pierce addressed them.
I desire now, lest I may not have the opportunity later, to pay homage to the gallantry of the soldiers of Irish freedom who have, during the past 4 days, been writing with fire and steel the most glorious chapter in the later history of Ireland. Justice can never be done to their heroism, to their discipline, to their gay and unconquerable spirit in the midst of peril and death.
On Saturday, the General Post Office garrison was completely surrounded, trapped in a row of houses on Moore Street. The leaders, Pierce, Connolly, Clark, McDermott and Plunkett, held one final meeting. The streets around their positions were littered with the bodies of civilians killed in the crossfire. The time for surrender had arrived. Nurse Elizabeth O'Farrell walked to the British barricade to seek terms. The reply was swift. Unconditional surrender. Pierce issued the order.
In order to prevent the further slaughter of Dublin citizens, and in the hope of saving the lives of our followers now surrounded and hopelessly outnumbered, the members of the Provisional Government present at headquarters have agreed to an unconditional surrender, and the commandants of the various districts in the city and country will order their commands to lay down arms.
On Sunday afternoon, a message came from Kent in the Union to Seamus Murphy, telling him to be ready to surrender. The news was received very badly, and there was dreadful grousing. They were flinging their rifles around in temper and disgust. Then word went round the whole distillery that we were to assemble in front of the building for the surrender. There were a few who refused to surrender, and they cleared off.
On Sunday morning, Father Augustine and Father Aloysius came to Jacobs to inform us that Pearse had surrendered. MacDonagh would not surrender until he got definite orders. Meanwhile, he told every man that could to get away, as there was no use of lives being lost. Everybody that could got out. There was a good deal of confusion and a lot of recrimination that we were surrendering without having been in action at all. MacDonagh left, and a good lot of us cleared out and got away. I managed to get home, and I was never arrested.
I saw the gate being opened by Sergeant O'Neill. Eamon Cant walked in. He was like a wild man. His tunic was open, his hair was standing on end, and he looked awful. He evidently hated the task of asking the garrison to surrender. We, coming on, fell in behind the volunteers. They tried to persuade us to go home, but we refused, saying we'd stick it out to the end.
A British soldier appeared in the building to make arrangements for the surrender with Commandant Mallon. The visit changed the whole atmosphere immediately. Instead of a continuation of the prevailing depression, a new spirit of independence, of hope and exaltation took its place. We were satisfied that all things that were possible had been done. There was nothing to be ashamed of. A manly part had been taken for the vindication of our principles. We had failed in our object, others had failed before, and they had not been ashamed or afraid of the consequences. Why should we?
A motor car with 2 British military officers and 2 volunteer leaders drove up to the College of Surgeons. After a short interval, Madam Markovich marched out of the college at the head of 100 men, and they gave up their arms.
Captain Dick Stokes, who fought under him, told me that before the surrender of Jacob's factory, Major McBride called some of his officers together. He told them, "Some of you may live to fight again, and if you do, take the open country for it and avoid a death trap like this."
After the surrender, the rebel fighters were herded together overnight in the open space at the top of O'Connell Street, and then on Monday morning marched to Richmond Barracks. There, they were closely scrutinised by the political detectives of G Division of the Dublin Police, the men who had obviously failed in their job of securing the British from sedition. Now, they took their revenge, picking out the leading rebels for court-martial. By late Monday, the first shipload of rank-and-file rebels had already sailed from Dublin to imprisonment in England. As they had anticipated, all 7 signatories of the proclamation were executed, as well as others who had commanded Republican forces throughout the Rising. William Martin Murphy, Dublin's leading capitalist, stridently demanded draconian measures. His newspaper, the Irish Independent, called the riot. No terms of denunciation would be too strong to apply to those responsible for the insane and criminal rising of last week. We care little what becomes of the leaders who are morally responsible for this terrible mischief. The executions. On Tuesday, May the 2nd, Padraig Pearse, Tom Clark, and Thomas MacDonagh were tried and sentenced to death. The executions began the following morning at 3:25 a.m. Pearse concluded his statement to the court with these words.
If you strike us down now, we shall rise again and renew the fight. You cannot conquer Ireland. You cannot extinguish the Irish passion for freedom. If our deed has not been sufficient to win freedom, then our children will win it by a better deed.
Tom Clark gave his wife a message for the Irish people.
I and my fellow signatories believe we have struck the first successful blow for freedom. The next blow, which we have no doubt Ireland will strike, will win through. In this belief, we die happy.
Tomas MacDonagh said,
The British occupation of Ireland has never, for more than 100 years, been compelled to confront in the field a rising so formidable as that which overwhelming forces have, for the moment, succeeded in quelling. This rising did not result from accidental circumstance. While Ireland lives, the brains and brawn of her manhood will strive to destroy the last vestige of British rule in her territory.
the next day, May the 4th, Ned Daly, Willie Pearce, Micheál O'Hanrahan, and Joseph Plunkett faced the firing squad. The night before he was shot, Plunkett married his fiancée, Grace Gifford, in the prison chapel. Their entire married life consisted of 10 minutes in his cell under armed guard. Major John McBride was executed on Friday, May the 5th. On Monday, May the 8th, Sean Houston, Michael Mallon, Con Colbert, and Eamon Cant were shot. Cant's statement, written in a cell in Kilmainham, declared,
I leave for the guidance of other Irish revolutionaries this advice. Never to treat with the enemy, never to surrender at his mercy, but to fight to the finish. I see nothing gained but grave disaster caused by the surrender which has marked the end of the Irish insurrection of 1916. Ireland has shown she is a nation, and in years to come, Ireland will honour those who risked all for her honour at Easter in 1916.
On Tuesday, May the 9th, Sean McDermott and James Connolly faced the court-martial. They were executed on May 12th. On the eve of his execution, McDermott wrote to the veteran Fenian, John Daly,
I have been sentenced to a soldier's death, to be shot tomorrow morning. I have nothing to say about this, only I look on it as part of the day's work. We die that the Irish nation may live. I know now that the Irish nation can never die. Let present-day place hunters condemn our action as they will. Posterity will judge us aright for the effects of our action.
Connolly, having been seriously wounded 2 weeks earlier, had to be tied to a chair for his execution. The night before his execution, his wife Lily and daughter Nora saw him for the last time.
One night, we were knocked up at about 11 o'clock. There was an ambulance outside the door. There was a military captain with it. He said the message he brought to us was, James Connolly was very weak and he wanted to see his wife and his eldest daughter. Mama had seen him the day before, and he was very weak. And she half believed him, but I guessed what it was. We were brought in the ambulance up to the castle. We were brought into the room where Daddy was. He lifted his head and he said, I suppose you know what this means? Mama was terribly upset. I remember he said to me, put your hands under the bedclothes. He slipped some paper into my hand and he whispered, get that out if you can. It's my last statement. Man could hardly talk. I remember he said, "Don't cry, Lily, you will unman me." Mama said, "But your beautiful life, James," she wept, "your beautiful life." Hasn't it been a full life, Lily? Isn't this a good end?
In his statement to the court, smuggled out of Kilmainham by his daughter Nora, Connolly said,
"We went out to break the connection between this country and the British Empire and to establish an Irish Republic. We believe that the call we thus issued to the people of Ireland was a nobler call in a holier cause than any call issued to them during this war. We succeeded in proving that Irishmen are ready to die endeavouring to win for Ireland their national rights, which the British government has been urging them to die to win for Belgium. As long as that remains the case, the cause of Irish freedom is safe. Believing that the British government has no right in Ireland, never had any right in Ireland, and never can have any right in Ireland, the presence in any one generation of even a respectable minority of Irishmen ready to die to affirm that truth makes that government forever an usurpation and a crime against human progress. I personally thank God that I have lived to see the day when thousands of Irish men and boys and hundreds of Irish women and girls were equally ready to affirm that truth and seal it with their lives if necessary."
Squadrons pass me by. No fight did home, no battle drum. Did some mystery tower too? What the angels moon or the lily swell rang out through the foggy dew. Holy high, o'er Dublin town, they hung up the flag of war. 'Twas better to die 'neath an Irish sky than at Solva soon and far. And from the plains of royal Meath, strong men came hurrying through, while Britannia's Huns with their long-ranged guns sailed in through the foggy dew. 'Twas Britannia made our wild geese go, that small nations shall be free. But their lonely graves are by summer's waves, where the shores of the great North Sea. Oh, had they died in peace aside, or fought with Cathal, their names we will keep where the Fenians sleep, beneath the shroud of the foggy dew. But the bravest fell, and the requiem bell rang mournfully and clear, for those who died that Easter tide in the springtime of the year. And the world did gaze in deep amaze at those fearless men, but few, who bore the fight that freedom's light might shine through the foggy dew.
Merci beaucoup. I don't know how I'm going to follow that. It was a fantastic performance, unbelievable. And in keeping with the Irish Club in Hamilton, who are a fantastic group of people. I think they're fed up with me visiting them, but I also visit because I enjoy it so much. But I'd like to thank them for putting on that show tonight. It's been, as I say, it was fantastic. I'd like to thank the union, LIUNA, for the use of the hall. Again, a magnificent and very, very becoming venue for what was on tonight. And I just want to say, I've been ambassador from Ireland to Canada for 6 years, and it's an incredibly privileged position. I'm under no illusion that it isn't a privileged position. And nights like that, like tonight, is exactly why it's such a privileged position. For to be invited into your community and to share events like tonight is an amazing experience, and one which I'll always cherish. Now, I'm stepping down because it's never a good idea to have privilege for too long, and but Hamilton will be one of the places that myself and my wife Patricia will remember very much. Tonight was the epitome of everything we're trying to do in 1916 commemoration. At the very start, we had a lot of discussions on the government side about what the government's role will be abroad. And if you go back to 1966, there was virtually no diaspora involvement in the commemoration. I've looked through all the books, I've looked through an awful lot of the files, and the only thing I can find out, there was a visit from a small group in Boston to Dublin, and they were recognised. So it's a huge change on what was happening in 1966, which is only right because, as I keep pointing out to them in Dublin, over 90% of the people who claim to be Irish live abroad. There's only 6.5 million people in the island of Ireland, there's 70 million in the diaspora. So the diaspora has every right and should be at the very forefront of all the commemorations, because it's actually there's more Irish DNA or genes abroad than there is in the island of Ireland. I'd like, in particular, also tonight to recognise my friend from Belfast, Danny Morrison. I went to a school in Dublin called Scully Connell, and 3 of the 4 who were shot on May the 8th were pupils of that school: Eamon Cant, Sean Colbert, and Con Colbert and Sean Houston. In fact, we have a museum in the school which 134 of the volunteers came from the one school, and as I say, it produced people like Ernie O'Malley, Emma Dalton and things like that. So growing up in that school, in 1966, it was Mother's Milk to celebrate in 1916, and then the Troubles came, and it was very hard, to be quite honest with you, working in a government department or working around to talk about the people in 1916. And the peace process has had a huge effect. It's had a massive liberating effect on all that. And it's great to see that 1916 can be celebrated by everybody. As I wrote to all the Irish organisations in Canada, said 1916 is a national, it's the property of the nation. It's not the property of the state. It's not the property of any individual party. It's not the property of any individual organisation. It's the property of the people of Ireland, and they can celebrate it how they want. Now, in fact, some Irish organisations in Canada aren't celebrating it, and that's fine for themselves if they want, because at the end of this, we want to come out of it as united and as inclusive as we were at the start. The Irish community in Canada has massively increased its influence in recent years in areas like visas and a whole series of other areas, and we've done that because we're united. But that shouldn't stop us celebrating 1916. 1916 was a huge event. It was an event that not only shaped Ireland, but shaped anti-colonialism around the world. I also double as Irish ambassador to Jamaica, and I keep telling people, one of the greatest prides is to be invited to Liberty Hall in Kingston, because the hero of Jamaica is a man named Marcus Garvey. And Marcus Garvey organised demonstrations in London to support the 1916 uprising, and he named the headquarters of the trade union movement in Jamaica Liberty Hall. In fact, he built a building in New York and called it Liberty Hall. As I say, in 1966, there was very little in Canada as well. Now tomorrow, Michael Enright on the CBC is going to devote 2 hours to the Rising across the whole of Canada, national programme, which I ask people to listen to. And here in Canada, I didn't expect the reaction we've got. We've already funded 28 organisations right across Canada, and we're aware of close to 50 events that are being organised. And that is a complete contrast to what happened in 1966, and an even bigger contrast to what happened at the 75th anniversary, because I'm unaware of any commemoration at the 75th anniversary. Now, Michael quickly always says my speeches are far too short, but the last thing I want to do is pay a special tribute to Michael Quigley. Michael's been a tremendous friend since I came here to Canada. I'm a Belfast native, I think via England, who came over here, and I call Michael the intellectual wing of the Irish Club in Hamilton, and also the unofficial advisor to the Irish Embassy on cultural matters. He's involved in everything. The first involvement I had with him, strong involvement, was on the 1913 lockout, which again we had a very successful commemoration here with Civil Line and the union movement, and again it was very much union sponsored. And then we also were involved in the Ridgeway conferences, which is essentially looking at the Fenian invasions. And now, of course, Michael, that work today is fantastic. Michael, you've got to take it to Broadway after this. And I know, Michael, like most Irish people, you can cope with anything but a compliment, but I'm going to keep it up. I just want to say in the end, this is probably my last visit to Hamilton. Myself and my wife's last visit to Hamilton. And you know, when you look back, Michael, like John, like Pauline, all the people in Margaret, all the people in the club here. And I'm just going to finish on one point, which was, I'm going to be a bit intellectual here, and quote W.B. Yeats. And W.B. Yeats said, "Think where man's glory best begins and ends, and to say, my glory was, I had such friends." Thank you, Michael.
At Easter time, 1916, when flowers bloomed and leaves were green, there dawned the day when freedom's cry called out, "Brave man, to fight and die." They were the men with a vision, the man with a cause, the men who defied their oppressors' laws, the man who